You're tuned in to the only all-sports talk network in the Middle East, IsraelSportsRadio.com.
Check out the Israel Sports Radio store by clicking on the store tab on IsraelSportsRadio.com. Great items such as t-shirts, hats, books, and much, much more. Price does include shipping, and we do ship throughout the entire world. All major credit cards are accepted to make your shopping experience easy and convenient. So once again, click on the store tab on www.IsraelSportsRadio.com.
Broadcasting live from Israel,
IsraelSportsRadio.com.
All right, and welcome to episode 5 of the Beltway Boys. Can't believe it's been 5 episodes, but it has. My name is Andy Gershman, along with the deepest voice in all of Baltimore sports, Brian Hoffman. How you doing, Brian?
Good morning, man. What's happening?
Is it morning? Is it night? I don't even know anymore. God, I know this is a football show, but we might as well do this. Staying up all night to watch these baseball games, which go way too late, it kind of throws your sleep pattern off a little. I mean, it's not.
Well, what's thrown off a little is the payrolls on some of these teams and the comparisons there.
Yeah, I'm not crying for anybody, to be honest with you. I know you're big on the economic disparity, but you know what? All these owners are billionaires. They want to put out the money, they can put out the money.
Obviously, this is a football show, so I'm not going to go incredibly into it, but I actually have nothing against the fans of Boston or the Boston Red Sox themselves, even teams like the New York Yankees, Los Angeles Dodgers. St. Louis is not like one of the worst spending teams in the league like Tampa Bay or Kansas City, Houston. However, what I love about the fact that we talk all football and why I'm happy we're doing a football show is because one of the reasons I love football so much is I believe the game is played on an even economic playing field. And, again, I don't blame Red Sox fans. I don't blame the Red Sox. I just feel like when I watch some of these series previous years, I think to myself, one team has an obvious handicap over the other. The St. Louis, my gut feeling at the beginning of the season, it's easy to say now that the Sox are ahead 3-2, is that just the lineups and the are not comparable. Maybe the pitching is, but I would say mainly in the lineup is where I see a real disparity.
Right, because Stephen Drew, pushes them over the top. Well, here's my feeling, and I know this is the good fight, but there's two things that go on. One, like I said before, any owner can spend whatever they want. You just happen to live in a area with a crazy owner who, doesn't really know what he's doing. And as far as football goes, I agree with you to a certain extent where it's parity. But if you look, there's certain organizations have higher cachet, can we say, than others. So they're always going to attract the free agents. Is that fair to say?
You mean because of the quality of the organization?
Yeah, quality of the organization.
Yeah, well, that's fine. I'm strictly talking about money.
Money.
I'm strictly talking about money and the fact that in football, a very small market team like the Green Bay Packers, for example, can have a chance in this league. Like if this were baseball, some of these Midwest teams, teams in much smaller markets would not be able to compete with teams like the Jets, New England Patriots, teams with these large media markets.
Well,
I'm happy that football takes that media revenue out of the equation. They actually encourage the splitting across the board of the media revenue.
Right. Well, I hear what you're saying, but I will go back to that the Cleveland Indians, the Pittsburgh Pirates, and the Tampa Bay Rays were all in the playoffs this year. So they obviously stayed competitive. And the Oakland A's, right? So obviously good baseball minds make good decisions. It's not always about payroll. But shall we move on to the topic at hand? which is.
Well, I just have to offer one rebuttal to what you just said. It's like one of those presidential debates, where the guy's really itching to say something back.
Okay, go ahead.
If we could just spend I just want one more rebuttal on this. Maybe we'll spend more time on another show. But for something like you just said, certain teams getting in, I feel those are anomalies, teams like Tampa Bay Rays, et cetera. And you mentioned something about ownership, and we may have a bad owner in Peter Angelos, but if you have a system that kind of takes the behaviors of an owner out of play, then you don't have to worry about the behaviors of a certain owner, because Angelos might be bad, but there are at least about 15 other guys that are possibly not spending the kind of money they could. Guys in Florida, for example, I'm talking about.
Oh, absolutely.
Miami there, and I mean, they've been going through this stuff for 15, 20 years. The guy might be worse than Angelos. And then there's guys in Cleveland and Kansas City this year were making big steps towards a possible wild card push. And at the end of the day, I feel like they didn't have the money to do it. Boston's able to go out and get Jake Peavy. That was the move that really upset me.
Yeah,
because like 2/3 of the teams in baseball are not going after Peavy.
Yeah, that Peavy move has really turned out well for them, hasn't it?
Well, I mean, look, the guy won game, helped you guys win game, or what was it? Did he pitch in game 2 when the Cardinals actually won?
Yeah.
But he kept you in the game.
All right.
You didn't lose the game because of Jake Peavy, and Jake Peavy propelled the Red Sox to get one of his top notches there in the AL. So, at least, in helping you guys get to the World Series, Peavy is a huge piece, and he's not something that a low market team is going to go out and rent a guy like that, like the Angels did with Greinke last year.
Right. I hear you. I do, with all due respect to the Orioles organization, they do have former Israel Sports Radio guest Dan Duquette running the show there, and I'm a big Dan Duquette fan. So we'll move on right there and agree that the Orioles are headed in the right direction. Around the Beltway this week in football, obviously your Ravens were off. The Redskins were in play. And the Redskins were up 21-7 on the Broncos. And all I can tell you from being around a lot of Redskins fans, a lot of smiles. At 21-7, the Cowboys had just choked it away. Now the Redskins were ready to pick up some ground. Third quarter goes, and it really doesn't matter the third quarter, but the fourth quarter, the wheels fell off the bus, to say the least, and the game ended with Kirk Cousins in the game and not RG3. What was your take from that game?
Well, what did we talk about last week? If I remember correctly, I basically said that to beat Denver, is going to be possible. The Redskins are going to have to put up 35-plus points, and that the problem was going to be that defense. I think the Redskins have some nice things going on offense. This week, I did not see RG3 clicking, though. Is that because of a better Denver defense? I know as far as fantasy is concerned, the Denver defense scored 20 points. I know I had a matchup in which I was facing RG3, scored well under 10. But I think the recipe to beat Denver is to score a few points, and then you're not going to hold Denver necessarily under 30, but if you can get to 35, you got a chance.
Yeah, what I found the problem was that the 21-7. First of all, Denver scores on that first drive, and you're thinking this is going to be unreal the way they move down the field. Then the Redskins get a little momentum. D Hall with a pick six, and it's looking like everything's pointing in the right direction. The problem was they went away from their game plan, their normal game plan. They were throwing the ball deep, which is not RG3's forte. He doesn't have the receivers to catch the ball deep like that. He does not have, other than Garcon, he does not have anyone, and I think we touched on this last week, anyone he can really trust. And, and Reed was ineffective. And so it made him very one-dimensional. And they just could never get anything going. And as it went on, again, RG3 had, I think, 2 interceptions and a fumble. Cousins had 2 interceptions. Well, you turn that ball over and give Peyton Manning more and more tries, it's never going to turn out well.
You mentioned last week, we were talking a little bit about Pierre Garçon, who in my opinion should be the standout, clear-all #1 receiver for the Redskins, who, by the way, might not be the Redskins anymore after, I don't know if Goodell and Snyder there have already met.
Yeah, they did meet. The Washington Post said yesterday that they met, and once again, Snyder said he is not changing the name.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to change the Redskins, there are possibly a lot of other names that, a lot of groups are getting together now when these teams travel, putting together demonstrations. And, I feel for some of the, I understand one side of it, but the question is, are these, what reason really are these people getting together? There's other names across the board in professional sports that could also be somewhat discriminatory. I know that when the Washington Bullets changed their name to the Wizards, now we got a clown name. Everybody liked the Bullets. You know what I'm saying?
Right. From what I hear, that the name Bullet, it was really the name change had less to do with bullets being offensive than it did with marketing. From what I was told, if you look at when that name change came, and we are way off topic, but if you look at when that name
Beltway Sports.
That's right. But if you look at when that name change happened, it happened about the time, I believe, the Raptors and the Minnesota Timberwolves came into the league. At that time, the Timberwolves, believe it or not, were selling more merchandise than the Bullets were, and these more established teams, and they decided, we need something that's going to generate some sales and generate some revenue through sales. And so that's when the decision finally came down, let's change the name. Don't be surprised.
I'll tell you how you get good revenue. You have a good team, and you have a guy like Kevin Garnett that sells Minnesota Timberwolves gear back in the day.
Because Agent Zero, like him or not, was not selling what Garnett was selling. The other thing is, don't be surprised, I was going to say, when that name gets changed back here shortly. The team is heading in an up arrow, I believe, but but that's
30 years
here nor there. So back to the Redskins, who end up getting destroyed, giving up, I believe, 31 points in the fourth quarter. That would be 31, I believe, unanswered points, and so now the team is reeling again with San Diego coming in this week, which we will talk about our picks later. But San Diego's no rollover team, that's for sure. And look, just when you thought things were right, coming off the Chicago game where they put up some big points, their special teams gave up a touchdown against Chicago, but they looked like they had kind of put it all together there. And we're going to make a run at the Broncos very similar, I think people thought, to what the Cowboys did, where they would go, punch for punch, and whoever had the ball last was going to win. Well, obviously it was whoever had the ball in the fourth quarter, and that was Mr. Manning. So didn't turn out.
And I don't believe Champ Bailey played in this game.
I don't think so. It was Cromartie that did everything in this game. With a 75-yard touchdown, he had some a couple sacks, some nice. He had a good tackles for loss of yards. He was all over the place, but and this was all. Isn't it interesting? Without getting too much into the Colts, Brian. It was interesting.
Yes, no problem. I won't go on an Irsay family rant this week.
It was interesting that when Peyton went to Indy and they honored Peyton, he loses. Shanahan goes to Denver, they honor Shanahan, and he loses. So maybe the catches do not be honored by the home team before the game. maybe it throws them into some other realm. The last thing I want to mention to you, and you know this as well as anyone, because your beloved Ravens changed out their offensive coordinator last year. With like 3-4 weeks to go? Was that right? You there?
I'm sorry.
Are you there?
Yes.
The Ravens changed out their offensive coordinator about 4 weeks ago in the season last year. Now, this year, people were all high on Kyle Shanahan last week. Now they're all talking fire Shanahan. Well, we know Shanahan's not going to get fired unless his father gets fired. So, what did you think when the Ravens changed theirs last year?
There's no doubt that I felt that bringing in Caldwell to make the play calling there, was a huge difference, something that led to the Ravens winning a ring. The reason I say that is we had a guy before in Cam Cameron who seemed to be running a rather vanilla offense for several years. Didn't seem to know when to mix up the run. Mind you, this is during a time where we had a decent offensive personnel in the field. Right now we're dealing with an O-line that can't run the ball. Ray Rice might be on the back end of his career. But when we had the pieces there, Caldwell was able to come in, do things with the receivers. Also, we had Anquan Bolden and a healthy Dennis Pitta. And what they were able to do there, they seemed to be running Bolden. Bolden was here for several years, and he was never what he was in Arizona. And when Caldwell came in here, Bolden in the playoff run last year for the Ravens actually looked like his old Arizona self. The guy, what I like about good offensive coordinators, and this is what has to happen in Washington, I think, with a guy like Jordan Reed, who wasn't involved in the game at all until garbage time late, ended up with like 90-something yards receiving, but was a complete non-factor in the first half, is that these offensive coordinators, like with Anquan Bolden, they started to use his strengths. What was he doing? He was a physical receiver. To throw it up to him on third down, knowing you trust the guy to go get it, or some of these slants in the middle of the field, take guys like Demaryius Thomas, instead of just throwing them straight passes, utilize their speed. Something that St. Louis finally was starting to do late in the game with Tavon Austin on Monday night. Almost beat the Seahawks. But, no, with a guy like Jordan Reed, for example. And, again, I'm upset with Pierre Garçon. I mean, his stat line finished with, again, less than 100 yards receiving. Did he even have a touchdown?
I don't think he did.
Yeah, I don't think he did either. Or somehow he did. I know in the last couple weeks he just hasn't been there. I don't see the playmakers. I will give credit to a couple of guys, Alfred Morris and Roy Halou. I think that running game is really good, and I think that's something that the Redskins have to build around. I only think it's going to make RG3 better. I think it made him better last season.
Yeah, I think so. I think, but the problem is, I still think he's very tentative when it comes to. He's tentative when it comes to that decision making. Last year it was so crisp, whether he was going to run, whether he was going to hand off, pass, whatever it was. It was just very crisp. It's still just not quite there. I don't know what if it's still just lingering, if it's the brace, what it is. But
concerning RG3, these types of quarterbacks, I've talked about it for a while on Israel Sports Radio. Colin Kaepernick, Cam Newton, RG3. I'm not really going to put Vic into that category because he's getting older. I just actually made a huge trade in a league this week, not the Israel Sports Radio League, but in which I actually got rid of Colin Kaepernick, who would have, by the way, cost me a second-round tender to keep next year. going with Andrew Luck instead, trading for Andrew Luck. And the reason I do something like that, to get back to the football field, not the fantasy, but the reason I go into the fantasy is because, a guy like Andrew Luck, I like the consistency there. I feel like these running quarterbacks, even Cam Newton, he's doing good right now, but he's had times in his 3-year career where he's kind of disappeared. And I think it's the running and the concussions, and maybe, when you're knocked out a couple of times, it really gets to you, and you could potentially be a completely different quarterback. And I think when you're talking about kind of a enigma a little bit with RG3 and a little bit of an inconsistency, even though I think, I really believe RG3 would be a better quarterback if the team around him were better. When your defense is giving up at least, 4 or 5 touchdowns a game, not 4 or 5 touchdowns a game, but like 30 plus points a game. It's not so easy, but I do worry about, I'd rather have in building a team a quarterback that's more of a prototypical pocket passer with an upside, like an Andrew Luck and a Flacco. And I do not have Flacco, by the way, in Luck's category. But I think the move of getting rid of all those draft picks a couple of years ago to get RG3, I think it was the proper move. Washington was starving for a fantasy quarterback. Well, literally, but Washington was starving for a quarterback, a franchise quarterback. They got one. I just don't think that I'd rather have the prototypical pocket passer.
Right. Well, like I said before we started this show and we were talking off air, kind of a boring week, if you ask me. Obviously, the game everyone's talking about is the Cowboys and the Detroit Lions. The way that ended, the Cowboys choke away another game, as they tend to do here quite often. Now you're seeing all these reports of Megatron puts up 379 yards. You see all these new things. Megatron is the MVP. MVP talks for Megatron. My personal feeling is, first of all, no one should ever be judged based on a performance against the Cowboys secondary. And that's a little overstated. Second of all, if I'm going to take the homer pick on this, my other feeling is, if he's talked about like this after his performance, then Romo at 500-plus yards should have been talked about after Denver, but he wasn't because they lost by 3 points. So,
Romo might be having some hearing problems right now with Des Bryant putting on some kind of a clown show on the sidelines.
Have you actually listened to what was said?
Yes. Yeah, I listened to the first part, not the second part where he was going at it with Jason Witten.
Right, the first part. So if you listen to the first part, personally, and again, I could have my, Silver Star glasses on.
It made it sound better, right?
I didn't think it was that bad.
No, I didn't think so either. But
basically, he said, "Look, we're the best at this. Get me the ball." And Romo was telling him when he needs to sit down and in the flat and wait for it, basically. But it was just, to me, it looked visually a lot worse than it was.
There's an argument that Dez is, some of these players that get verbal on the sidelines. I remember Anquan Bolden doing it with his offensive coaches when he was in Arizona, who weren't getting him the ball. When Arizona was making a charge for the Super Bowl that year against the Steelers. Maybe these players have a right to do this. I know, sometimes players do this and they're not the best players. But right now, Dez, to me, might be a top 3 wide receiver. And it's not like Dallas is doing anything else that's really working. So why not, build with the guy, who's, I think they ought to be on Dez's side here,
Well, what I feel is that, Brian, I think, he has the right to speak. I'm not sure that's the right time, but, these guys are playing in a very emotional game. So, sometimes this happens. I did hear this, and I do tend to agree with it. And if Tom Brady, who in the first few weeks was all over his receiving corps and all over his coaches, when he does it, he's a legend, quote unquote. He's he's just fiery and firing up his guys. But that comes with 3 Super Bowl rings, right? When Des Bryant does it, he's a malcontent. He doesn't, he's showing up his quarterback and his coach and this and that. So it's all in perspective in which, glasses you put on. I think it is very interesting when these guys, get labeled and categorized. And so that's what happened to Des Bryant. In a nutshell, basically, it came down to, everyone said, oh, Jason Garrett's the greatest. You saw Witten kind of pull him away. You saw Romo's hands in the air and his hands in the air, and it looked to me much worse than it sounded.
I was more concerned with the Cowboys running game than the stuff going on the sidelines. I don't know how a team that is averaging 5 yards per carry in the Detroit Lions is able to somehow look like the 2000 Baltimore Ravens.
Brian, their running game is, how they have not addressed that is just unreal.
Well, DeMarco Murray does go out, but I picked up Joseph Randall in a couple of leagues, and the guy just, has not been incredibly effective on the ground or incredibly effective in the air as a pass catching back. But they do have a couple guys that have been somewhat injured, in Tanner and Dunbar.
You say Murray is it went out. Murray always goes out. You have to have a backup in this league. You cannot run in this league thinking whoever you're starting at the beginning.
Right, Joe. No doubt. The Ravens did, something similar in that they probably had a little more faith in Bernard Pierce than Dallas had in guys like Tanner, Dunbar, and Randall. I don't even know if Randall might have even been on the in people's minds with the Cowboys before the season began.
Right. All right, we got to wrap up this first segment shortly, but there's 2 games I just want quick opinions on that really kind of surprised me, and that would be the Jets getting steamrolled by Cincy. Coming off the emotional Patriots win, that is unbelievable. And then also you had Atlanta getting rolled by Arizona. Was it Arizona?
They got rolled by somebody, Andy. Arizona, you might be right about that, because I think I had Michael Floyd, if I'm not mistaken. Did he have, and I'm trying to think, he didn't have a great game. He had about 10 points.
It was Arizona, and they got, rolled.
But Atlanta's a nice, steamable team.
Yeah, but can you believe the Jets? Is that just the product of?
No, I do believe it. I do believe it, Andy.
We both picked Cincinnati, but I don't think either one.
We both picked Cincinnati. I said personally that, if I remember, when I was talking about the game, I said here's a bad team, really bad team that's going to get beat by a halfway decent team. The difference, and we might get into this with a little bit of fantasy later on, but was a new toy that Andy Dalton has to work with, which might be a recipe, an ingredient in Cincinnati that could propel them a lot further potentially in the playoffs, Mr. Marvin Jones.
Right.
And I think Cincinnati might have just found a lot of things in this game, although I'm just tickled as to why Giovanni Bernard seems to all of a sudden not be doing a whole lot.
All right, that's going to wrap up our first segment. When we come back, we'll do a couple minutes of fantasy because nothing really happened in fantasy this week. And then
not at all.
And then we will do our picks for next week. So you're listening to the Beltway Boys on Israel Sports Radio. We will be right back after these commercial breaks.
You're tuned in to the only all-sports talk network in the Middle East. IsraelSportsRadio.com.
Check out the Israel Sports Radio store by clicking on the store tab on IsraelSportsRadio.com. Great items such as t-shirts, hats, books, and much, much more. Price does include shipping, and we do ship throughout the entire world. All major credit cards are accepted to make your shopping experience easy and convenient. So once again, click on the store tab on www.IsraelSportsRadio.com.
Broadcasting live from Israel.
IsraelSportsRadio.com.